State Senate a lot, and it was good. You know, it creates dialogue, creates story ideas for you, and allows me to be able to communicate, you know, to the public in another way, in addition to all our great work with social media and my being out there and all that stuff. So maybe I'll just start by saying it's a very interesting time in the city. Hold on. Hold on.
No, it's the delay from.
Are we, do we have to, we're gonna, okay. I don't like hearing myself. It's not a happy thing. It's just kind of nasal voice.
We have to. Okay.
So when that happens to us, we just pull out our earpiece. Yeah.
I think that's for the road too, but we can, when it's time to do an area with them, unmute it. I don't want to keep you guys waiting. We're still getting mic audio from there.
Okay.
For the live stream. When it comes time to Q&A from the press on the Zoom,
Okay.
we'll figure it out.
Anyways, I'll just go. You know, last night, it's a very interesting time in our city. There's obviously a lot going on. We're still obviously addressing COVID and the Delta variant, both within our city family, but also out in our community. We have to remain vigilant in every way. At the same time, we're moving forward aggressively on all fronts in our city. Last night, of course, I believe it was a historic evening. The city passed the most comprehensive binding plan to address homelessness in the city's history. As we talked about last night, we did not, we took a very different approach. We did not look at one or two or three sites and say, well, let's get started. And then once they're successful, we move on. We passed a comprehensive plan that will enable us to cite at least 20 different shelters, tiny home villages, safe ground and safe parking facilities in our city. And between the siting plan and the programmatic strategies, we believe that we can help over 9,000 people a year get out of their current terrible circumstances into something better. None of this is easy. Implementation is everything. I believe the strong council vote last night, 9-0, and the will of the council, the will of the community, the need to make this the top implementation priority of our city is going to lead to good and great results. And I think it was a big night, but only the beginning. Why don't we open it up? Let's talk about anything you guys want.
I'll go first, Mayor. We were in the same room just last week talking
Yes.
about this plan.
Yes.
The vote was made. We're going forward with this. Talk to me about when we could start seeing, you know, the groundwork work going on, some work being done. Do you have any dates in mind on when those sites can be available to our community?
Well, when I say implementation is everything, I mean it, because this cannot take as long as it sometimes takes to build traditional shelter facilities. We had the experience in South Sacramento with the Meadowview Shelter. It took a long time. And of course, that was a formal sprung shelter. The WX project's taken a long time, that in part because of the fact that it's state property and required a lot of approvals from other levels of government. But this is different. This must be done with the greatest amount of urgency. And so what do I expect? We'll hear from the city manager either next week or the week after with a full implementation plan. This needs to be every arm of the city and every part of the city's leadership involved in implementation. There is no reason why we cannot get up a number of these sites, especially the city-owned and controlled sites, within a couple months, if not sooner. You know, I couldn't be more clear, at least from my perspective, that this cannot be the traditional way of doing things. This is a state of emergency, whether we call it that, whether we declare it in a formal or a legal way. Everything has to be urgency. Look, I'm ultimately responsible, always. And at the same time, I can do what I do and try to do it well. And what do I do? What is my job? It's to set the table. I mean, think about this, to pass a resolution that creates 20 sites, all approved, that creates a programmatic plan, to pass a resolution that says all of this is intended to be self-executing. In other words, we delegated it all to the city team to implement without the need for further council approval. And then to gather $100 million. And some of that was my work in terms of leading the big city mayors through the initial stages of direct allocation to cities. We've set the table. And our work is not done, and my work is not done because I'm ultimately responsible for seeing it through. Under this system of government, I set the table, and I think set it very well, as did my colleagues. And I have faith in the city team. I do. This is, but I think if we're honest about it, we'd also acknowledge that addressing homelessness has not been a traditional role of city government. And we can't do it alone. We talked a lot about the county. We're having very good conversations with them. And hopefully in the next couple of weeks, we'll be able to be public about what that means exactly. But this has not been a traditional role of the city. When we think about emergency operations, we generally don't think about homelessness. We think about natural disasters. We think about traditional public safety crises. This is a new day. And this issue needs to be a core part now of what the city takes on, because the public is demanding it. This is not my, this is not my pet project. This is not, I mean, I'd rather work on many other things. This is what the people of the city are desperately wanting because of the impact on everything, on our conscience, on our safety, on the health of our city. And so it's all about implementation. And I think we can get started right away.
When you say a couple of months, could that mean as soon as October? That's 2 months.
Well, I will say this, with all my, with all my talk about urgency and getting the scale and all that, I do think that the first 3 or 4 of these safe ground tiny home villages that we put up are going to be key, because we want to do them right. And we want to show the public what it means to combine the ULI principles, those designs we saw last night, with the right kinds of services, well operated with the right, with the right providers, the good providers, and show the public what we can do as we get to scale. So fast, yes. The first 3 or 4 are going to be key. October, I don't know. Quickly. Quickly.
I have a question from Zoom. Go ahead, Tony.
Mayor, can you hear me?
Yes, hi Tony, how you doing?
Good morning. Good morning. It's good to hear from you. Say, of course, I got a couple questions, but I'm gonna start here. Is there any other comprehensive, and I'm gonna use that word comprehensive,
Yeah, we changed the term, and I'm always learning that. I'm glad we changed the phrasing from the word master to comprehensive.
Yeah, and you certainly can credit Katie for bringing that in there.
Yeah, no, I'm glad she did. We're always learning.
Mm-hmm. So am I. Is there any other comprehensive plan across the state, across the country, such as this? Oakland, San Francisco, Stockton, LA. They have their big issues. Of course, the bigger cities, but this seems like this could be a blueprint, not only for the state but the country. Could you kind of like share, what you learned from creating such a plan such as this one?
Other cities in California are, I know, taking aggressive approaches and doing a really, really good job. I do not know of any other city in the state or the country that has sought approval for multiple sites at one time in this way, with this kind of scope and breadth. I don't know of it, and I hope it's a model. Absolutely, I love Sacramento to lead. This just makes sense when you think about the fact that siting is our biggest challenge. Money is not our biggest challenge. Ongoing money is a huge challenge, but in the 2-year time frame, we have real money. The biggest challenge is siting, and you heard it last night. I mean, the public hearing yesterday was exactly what I would expect. There were people who supported it. There were people who opposed it for different reasons. And one of the reasons, of course, was they didn't like the locations. I understand it.
Mayor, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. So yes, this should be a state and national model. I hope it is.
Speaking of that, it seems like everyone wants to see the problem solved until they come to their neighborhood. What can you tell them for peace of mind and any safety factors that you've put into place?
It is our obligation to do this in a way that is not only respectful of neighborhoods, but improves the quality of life in neighborhoods. And I'm confident we can do that based upon the kind of input we're getting and the commitment we've made to quality, ULI again. But secondly, the quality of life in so many of our neighborhoods is negatively affected by people living unsheltered and outdoors. We're trying to bring people in, or at least into a more safe and organized setting so that we don't have these tent encampments spread out all over the city. So we're trying to improve the quality of life in our city, in our neighborhoods, for our unhoused residents, but also for our neighborhoods and for our business corridors. And yes, and this is just a beginning, as a lot of my colleagues said. We're going to expand on the number of sites. And over time, I hope that it will be more geographically rounded in the way that people have asked. But as I said last week, and it's not intended to be a cliche or be flippant in any ways, that this cliche that perfect cannot be the enemy of the good, and perfect cannot be the enemy of the great, because I think this was great last night as a beginning. We just have to move forward.
I have a question for you. Last week, we did a story about a dozen cars that were towed from a homeless camp near Commerce.
Commerce, right.
We were told from the city that if this plan is approved, the folks living near Commerce and Lathrop will eventually be moved out. They were told to leave. So what's happening next for those folks, just like those at Commerce and Lathrop, that feel like they have the right to stay there?
So Commerce Circle is one of many hotspots in our city. And I said this at the end last night, and the city should always lead with a big heart and put the people who are living unsheltered first. That's not inconsistent with having a cleaner and a safer city. And I do believe, it's why I called for a right to housing and an obligation for people to accept it when it's offered. And by the way, that's coming. Haven't forgotten about that. Wanted to get through this chapter first. That expresses my belief, and I think the beliefs of the vast majority of people in our city, that once we actually implement this comprehensive plan, and we're able to offer people safe and dignified alternatives. And I mean in the plural, because not everybody wants to live in a congregate shelter. I respect that. Some people are ready for permanent housing. People want autonomy. I get that and respect it. The needs of the human being come first. Once we're able to implement, then I think it is fair and appropriate to say there are places in the city where you cannot live, including Commerce Circle. But last night allows us to begin establishing the moral and legal high ground to define the place and manner where people can and cannot live. But it's sequential. You don't, what they did last week in terms of the towing of cars, and I know I'm looking into, because I've heard a little bit from the advocates about what if people were living in cars, we don't take people's living until we have the capacity. On the other hand, where there are clear public safety or public health violations in these existing encampments, it can be appropriate for code enforcement and the Department of Community, DCR of Community Response, to address those issues. And where, you hear these stories, and I don't know if they're true, that massive drug dealing or people, charging rent. I mean, it's so unbelievable. I don't know if it's true or not. But, there are a lot of homeless people that are victimized out there. And so just saying, well, people get to live how they are living, and that's just the way it is. I'm sorry. There's a balance here. There is. And, I'll put my record of compassion and empathy for people who have really had a hard time against anybody's. The author of The Millionaire's Tax in California, $2.5 billion of mental health services in California, including in Sacramento County. But it's not either or. It can't be. And so, you know what? People on the left and the right are going to be mad. We got to do the right thing.
So just a follow up to that, with
Yeah.
the right to housing and the obligation for people to accept
Yeah.
it, how does the city plan to enforce that?
We're working on that right now. Certainly, I want to hold the city accountable to implementing the comprehensive plan. And you look at Judge Carter in Los Angeles, he is seeking to hold the city and county of Los Angeles accountable for creating more shelter space. The city should be held accountable to implement this comprehensive plan. And at the same time, an individual, once they're offered safe and dignified alternatives, should have to say yes. Now it's sequential. And even if they refuse, I would never criminalize it, never fine them. That's not what I'm into. But I'm into saying that you can't, if you're offered a safe and dignified alternative, then you can't live here because Commerce Circle is a business corridor. It's not where you should be. Make sense?
Yeah, and how will you get folks to buy into it? We do have a crowd of folks that enjoy their drugs, enjoy their alcohol, and I know that those may not be allowed into the safe ground spaces.
Well, remember, the county now has Laura's Law, which allows them it gives them an additional tool to require people in the limited but appropriate circumstances to take treatment. And we're going to have, part of the key to implementation is extensive outreach. This is what Bridget Dean is building here. This is where we need to bring all of the outreach workers with all the PBIDs and healthcare systems under one umbrella, so that we've got hundreds of outreach workers who are trained to be able to intervene with people. And what I know from the Mental Health Services Act, Prop 63, is that the vast majority of people will say yes. It may take 10 touches because it requires the building of trust. People who are out there have been traumatized, and think about what it must be like and the trauma. And so most people will come in. There will be some who won't. And in that instance, okay, the remedy will be, well, you can't live here. You can't camp here.
I have a question from the Zoom from Tony again. Go ahead and unmute
Yes.
yourself.
Thank you again. Mayor Steinberg, last night, out the blue, we heard Angela Gaspi came out with a plan. She finally has a dot in one of her boxes to identify a site. I think 3 of them, but one is official. Just wanted to get your thoughts on her plan, which I believe she said will be funded in another way, but just to get your thoughts of how she came through with that, because in the beginning with the information that your office had brought forward, there was no sighting in her area. So just wanted to get your thoughts on what she came up with.
Sure. Well, first of all, I'm very happy and I congratulate her. And it is all part of the citywide effort to bring thousands of people indoors. In fairness, in the plan itself, District 1 is specifically referenced as a place for a motel, and now she's identified the motel. We didn't name the motel in the plan because until she had finished, and SHRA had finished their negotiation with the motel owner, we didn't want to name it because then the price goes way up. So in fairness, District 1 was in the comprehensive plan. It's just she is now announcing today the specific site. So I think it's great. I'm just happy that all of the members have taken a really active part in engaging with the community and in coming up with sites. Is any of this perfect? No, it is not perfect. But we're not sitting around waiting for the perfect. We've got $100 million. We now have 20 plus, because Eric Guerra added a site, 21 approved sites. Plus the motel conversion strategy, of which today there's an announcement about the first one. So you talk about implementation? Well, we're already starting.
Mayor, one of the sites off of Northgate is right across the street from an elementary school. And I think it's important to talk about how the good neighbor policy would work to ease some of the concerns that parents, people who live in that area have.
Sure. Well, first of all, as I understand that particular site, it is this future home of Joshua's house. Am I correct on that one? It is the future site for Joshua's house, which is a hospice for homeless people. Now, the definition of hospice are people who have 6 or fewer months to live. So first of all, the very nature of the people who will be served by that site, I mean, God, if that doesn't create some heartfelt compassion for all of us, imagine being out on the street, being disengaged from your family and friends and having a terminal illness. So I just push back on the stereotype, first of all, or on the assumption that a group of people who are dying, who have been homeless, are somehow going to be a threat or a negative impact to any neighborhood. So that's my answer. But secondly, there's going to be good neighbor policies for every one of these facilities, which means that, there are going to be regulated hours of operation, noise, no allowance of people congregating on the perimeter, a whole host of things, as Jay Chenier laid out last night. And I bet you, let me tell you this story. So I had a little row with the former council member from District 8, if you recall, Teresa remembers from last year, big community meeting out in Meadowview, and you know, Larry Carr was dead set against the Meadowview Shelter. Thought he said we should be busing people out to some remote area. And of course, we had a good political fight and we prevailed overwhelmingly at the city council. Took a long time to build that sprung shelter, but now it's up. No one's complaining. No one that I know of. It is well managed by VOA. It looks good. It's clean. And it is helping dozens of women. I know the capacity has been a little less because of COVID, but it's helping dozens of women. I've been out there. It hasn't been a negative to the community center, to the neighborhood at all. So some of this, it's our obligation to do it right and to make sure that the facilities are quality and that they're operated professionally and that we enforce good neighbor policies. But it's also about getting over the stereotype, the unfair stereotype that people that homeless people are such a terrible problem. There are some people who engage because of their drug addiction, whatever, who engage in behaviors, yes, that are scary and that people have the right to be very, very concerned. But that's not the majority of people. That is not the majority of people. But for the grace of God, there go I. That could be any of us. Let's start thinking that way. Let's enforce the law where there is illegal behavior, where there's drug sales. Let's enforce good neighbor policies. Absolutely. Let's insist on quality. And let's be kind to each other.
I have a question from Janelle. Go ahead and unmute from Cap Radio.
Hi, Mr. Mayor. Thanks for
Hi, Janelle.
holding. Hi, thanks for holding the press availability. I just have
Sure.
a few questions. So
Sure.
just a clarifying thing from last night. So because Councilmember Ashby's site wasn't listed on the map, does that mean that 21 priority sites are technically pre-approved, or is that a separate thing?
Well, so I guess you could say it's 22 sites now. You could say that. The way we divided the report, and by the way, Julia Burrows back here, who was my partner in drafting all this, is retiring on Friday, by the way. And you should interview her because she's done a great, great job here for our city. The way we did this was we identified the 20 sites. And then we had a second category of programmatic strategies, which included the motel conversion. So the motels were not technically one of the sites, but they could be. I mean, you could shift that over. It's just a way of trying to describe what we're doing. But it's 21 vacant sites that we can build the kind of tiny home villages that you saw yesterday presented by ULI. On the comparable side of the ledger, you've got motel conversions, you got vouchers, you have scattered sites. We're going to do it all. So you could say 22 if you wanted. Be okay with me? Say 23. Oh, we've got existing motels up, the Greens, for example, right? In North Sacramento and in South Sacramento, those were already up. The Grove is already up. I mean, so in a way, if you take, the Grove, you take the Greens, I mean, we and WX, which is going to open at the end of the month or in September, it's really probably closer to 30 sites. Truth be told, it's closer to 30 sites.
Thank you. Yes. So I was also wondering, because this is a concern that was brought up by several callers that the end goal is to create more affordable housing for folks. So I'm wondering why you decided to, I guess, allot this $100 million towards, creating these sites and expanding programs instead of just funneling most of it or all of it towards affordable housing programs.
Well, first of all, some of the sites are for permanent housing. And the tiny home concept, the efficiency home concept, the manufactured home concept, that can be permanent housing. And there are over 1,000 sites, I believe, over 1,000 beds designated for permanent housing. But it's a great question. And I agree with the premise of the callers last night that this will only work long-term if we have more permanent, affordable housing. We have to start somewhere. We have a state of emergency here. There are some people, there's not enough affordable housing. We've tried, we put $30+ million into affordable housing trust fund. I'm going to try to build that number up even higher over the course of the next year. We've got people who may not be ready for permanent housing, who are languishing on our streets. We've got people who can be ready for permanent housing if they get a little bit of transitional support, including temporary housing. And so we have to start somewhere. And so this plan recognizes that we are dealing with a state of emergency. It is unhealthy, it is unsafe, it is uncivil for people to be living out in the elements. And I'm calling for a right to housing, not a right to shelter, a right to housing, of which shelter is a necessary component of that. We've got to get people housed, but this is a vital start. And under the California way, it takes too long and it's too expensive to build conventional affordable housing, which is why, again, we've got to have we have to have a innovation housing revolution in this state. And maybe we started in the city here with these manufactured homes and these tiny homes, because some of that needs to be permanent housing. We're not going to build enough conventional single family or even apartment housing for everybody in need in the way in the time. We've got to be innovative and we have to be creative.
A follow-up to that, how do those tiny homes count as permanent housing when they were told, or we were told, that the people would only be staying there for 6 months?
Well, no. So if you read the report, we did make some assumptions. We took all of the beds that were presumed to be temporary out of the congregate shelters, out of most of the tiny homes, for most of them, for about half of the motel space. And we assumed, it's an assumption, that for half of the people, for half of the units would be for temporary housing and half would be for permanent housing. For the half that would be living there temporarily, we assume a flow through every 6 months. But we did not, if you notice, we did not double. So that allows you to double your overall number. We did not double the entire number because some of the units were designating for permanent housing. I know it's a little bit, opaque, but that's the way we did it.
Do you have a number of how many are dedicated to permanent housing?
Do we know, Julia, how many are dedicated to permanent housing?
So it's by category, but I can show you the report.
Yeah, well, we can show you afterwards if that's okay. All right.
I have a question from Yusuf on the Zoom from Tech Week.
Hi, Yusuf.
Hey, Mayor, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. I know this obviously just got passed last night, but I have to ask you, have you started thinking about what funding this plan will look like after 2 years and where some of that confidence comes from that you guys will be able to keep this up once this one-time money runs out?
So I am confident because, as I said last night, success begets success. and demonstrated success brings more money. And then I look at what the United States Senate did today, which is passing an outline. And I know there's a long way to go, an outline for a $3.5 trillion infrastructure stimulus package that includes a lot more money for housing. And that's on top of the American Rescue Plan, on top of HAP 3, on top of home, on top of all the other sources that are mentioned within the report. And there are no guarantees. Of course there aren't. But we have all this money now, and we're not turning it back. We're going to put it to the uses of which it is intended, to actually prove concept here, to try to demonstrate that with a enforceable, comprehensive siting plan, $100+ million, that doesn't include the to-be partnership with the county, and a will, that we can move the needle and help thousands of people along the way. But there are no guarantees. There are none, but that's the nature of funding streams these days, right? I always say that one-time money repeated, and then repeated again, and then repeated again, is sort of the same as ongoing money. You just may have to fight for it anew every year or every 2 years. And maybe we will get to a permanent source in the state or in the country. That's possible too.
I have one more question from Tony on the Zoom. Go ahead, Tony.
Okay, thank you. This is my last question, Mayor. It was bandied about last night about the issue of systemic racism, notably Chet Hewitt, and I think one or two of the other city council members that brought this up. Just wanted to know, to get your approach to this. I know it probably, to me, it sounds a little bit ambiguous because they wasn't really explaining what they meant by systemic racism, but just want to get your thoughts on your approaches to something that could be a problem later on down the road, or not be a problem if you combat it head on first.
Well, I think first of all, we did talk about equity in the plan itself, but I was really glad that Councilmember Vang and Chet Hewitt and others asked that we put a finer point around systemic racism. This is what it means to me. African Americans are disproportionately impacted by homelessness. The numbers, the percentage of African Americans is much higher than the percentage of the African American population in Sacramento. And that's true around the state. And that is a result of systemic racism. And so approach a racial equity lens with that and go after this. Get people housed, get people the help and treatment they need. Do it by the thousands. Don't wait. Don't accept the status quo as is. Been saying this for 5 years, actually for much longer than that, because I've been at this, for all my years. And now maybe this is a breakthrough moment. Maybe this is a breakthrough moment. We've certainly set the table. Set the table. We have the sites. We have the resources. We have the will. Let's go do it. As I said, Kelly helped me last night with yesterday with my backdrop on my Zoom. We can do this. Is that what it was? We can do this. Yes, that's how I feel. We can do this. Thank you.
I guess just one more.
Yeah, Teresa.
On the right to housing, what's the next step on that? When will it go to council?
I want to get it to Law and Ledge. I know I have another meeting with the city attorney's office. We're drafting away. Want to get it to Law and Ledge soon after. I think I'd like to get it to Law and Ledge. I hate the timelines, but This is August, the middle of August. You mentioned October. I'd like to get the lawn ledge definitely this fall. Okay. I didn't want to conflate it with this particular part of the sequence in the debate. But I think the right to housing and the obligation to take it reinforces the comprehensive plan. It will create another incentive, another impetus, another requirement to implement what we did last night with the same urgency, with the same passion that went into the development of this plan in the first place. Let's look at this. And look at my colleagues. The hundreds of meetings that they had. I mean, again, it's not perfect. But the fact that they went out there, that we went out there and held 100+ meetings and engaged with thousands of constituents to have this very serious discussion, just the process itself, I'm proud of. I really am proud of on behalf of the city, because this was not done. This was the opposite of being done behind closed doors where, oh, yeah, mayor and a couple of members came up with the sites and here you go. Just the opposite. It was intentionally done to have my colleagues go out and solicit and engage with their constituents, my constituents, and to come up with the sites. Every one of these sites was presented by one of my colleagues. That's pretty rare too. That's really rare. It's a good piece of work. And now, but it's a piece of paper. It's multiple pieces of paper. Fine pieces. It's a great report, but it's what we do with it now. It's what we do with it and how we do it that ultimately matters. Thanks, everybody.